What if the man you humiliated turned out to be the CEO of the entire company? Watch what happens next. The sun hung high over the bustling construction site, its intense rays casting long shadows over the unfinished building. Sweat glistened on the foreheads of laborers as they worked under the relentless heat, their hands calloused from lifting bricks, mixing cement, and tightening steel beams. Amid the chorus of machinery, one voice suddenly pierced through the voice of Henry Mitchell, the chief engineer. "Can you be quiet and let the professionals speak?" Henry's voice was sharp, his tone dripping with condescension. His well-pressed white shirt, spotless despite the dust around, stood in stark contrast to the worn-out work jacket of Daniel Harris, the middle-aged black man standing a few feet away. Henry's finger jabbed at a set of blueprints pinned to the wall, his gaze sweeping across the gathered team of engineers and workers. "We don't pay construction workers to think. We pay them to follow instructions." A hush fell over the group. Most turned their eyes away, afraid of becoming the next target of Henry's wrath. But Daniel Harris didn't look away. He didn't lower his head. His steady, calm gaze met Henry's, and for a brief moment, the arrogance in the chief engineer's eyes flickered. "With all due respect, sir," Daniel spoke, his voice steady but firm. "The foundation design at the northeast corner ignores the natural slope of the ground. If it's not reinforced, we're looking at uneven settlement. That means cracks, maybe even structural failure within a few years." A few younger engineers exchanged nervous glances, unsure whether to support the worker who spoke so boldly or stay silent. They knew Daniel's reputation. He wasn't just another laborer, he was precise, methodical, and experienced. But experience didn't matter to Henry Mitchell, not when it came from someone who didn't wear a suit. Henry's lips curled into a mocking smile. "Oh, so now we have an expert in the art of shoveling dirt lecturing us on structural integrity. Maybe I should hand you my degree from Stanford." A few forced chuckles followed his words. Laughter meant to please the man in charge, not because it was genuinely funny. Daniel didn't respond. He simply folded his arms, his calm expression unchanged. Beside Henry stood Ethan Gray, his assistant, who wore an uneasy look. He was young, ambitious, and eager to please, but even he could sense something was wrong with the way his boss spoke. Yet, like the others, he stayed quiet. The meeting continued, Henry's voice booming as he pointed out various changes to the project timeline, cost adjustments, and safety protocols. But Daniel's words lingered in the air like an unresolved echo. The workers resumed their tasks, but a subtle tension simmered just beneath the surface. Daniel stepped back from the group, his steady hands folding the blueprint he had studied so carefully. He didn't look hurt, nor did he seem defeated. Instead, his expression was one of quiet determination. As he walked away from the makeshift meeting area, his fingers brushed the pocket of his work jacket, feeling the cold, metallic frame of his old Nokia phone. He slipped it out, his rough fingers navigating the worn keypad with practiced ease. He typed a brief message, just 10 characters, and hit send. KT3P15 callback. The message was simple, cryptic to anyone else, but it meant something far greater to Daniel. It was a signal that the balance of power on this construction site was about to shift in ways no one could have imagined. Far from the bustling chaos, in a quiet office high above the city, a sleek black smartphone buzzed softly on a polished oak desk. A man in a dark suit reached for it, his sharp eyes narrowing slightly as he read the message. A thin smile played at his lips. Back at the site, Daniel didn't return to his work right away. Instead, he walked to the far end of the lot, where a group of workers were taking a short break, their faces weary but alert. He exchanged a few quiet words with Samuel Rogers, the veteran site supervisor. The older man nodded, his grey hair catching the sunlight, his lined face showing a mix of respect and quiet amusement. "I knew it wasn't just any worker making those calls," Samuel murmured. "You have something up your sleeve, don't you, Daniel?" Daniel smiled, but it wasn't a smile of pride. It was the smile of someone who had seen too much arrogance and was ready to teach a lesson. "Sometimes, Samuel, you have to let them build their towers of pride," he said, his voice low but steady, "so they can watch them crumble." As the afternoon wore on, Henry Mitchell strutted across the site, barking orders and receiving hurried responses. His assistant, Ethan Gray, struggled to keep pace, noting down instructions and ensuring nothing disrupted his boss's sense of control. But behind the scenes, a quiet transformation was beginning. Daniel's words to Samuel spread subtly among the workers. Whispers moved from one group to another, not loud enough to attract Henry's attention, but clear enough to spark a quiet solidarity among those who had always been silenced. In the control room, Peter Lawrence, a senior engineer with silver hair and a calm demeanor, leaned over a stack of blueprints. His gaze drifted toward the northeast corner's design, and his frown deepened. His mind raced back to something he had overheard, Daniel's voice, clear, logical, and unyielding. It made sense. Too much sense to ignore. Peter quietly closed the blueprint and stood up. He was older, respected, and had seen enough failed designs to know when to speak up. But he also knew that the truth needed the right moment to be heard, and that moment was coming. Back outside, Daniel stood by the edge of the site, his eyes scanning the bustling workers, the looming cranes, and the rows of steel beams rising into the sky. His expression was calm, but his gaze was sharp. He wasn't just a laborer on this site. He was the unseen cornerstone, and soon they would all know it. The sun dipped lower over the construction site, casting long, shadowy silhouettes across the dusty ground. Workers hustled to complete their tasks before the day's end, their conversations reduced to murmurs beneath the hum of machinery. In the distance, Daniel Harris stood by the edge of the lot, his gaze fixed on the dirt road leading to the site. He had been here for years, quiet, reliable, and respected by those who bothered to notice. But today, everything was different. The air held a strange tension. Workers who had witnessed the clash between Daniel and Henry Mitchell, the chief engineer, whispered among themselves. Most expected Daniel to be reprimanded or even dismissed. After all, speaking up against a man like Henry rarely went unpunished. But Daniel didn't seem worried. If anything, his calm demeanor unsettled them. Inside the portable site office, Henry Mitchell leaned back in his chair, his polished leather shoes propped on the table. He sipped his imported coffee, chuckling as he recounted his lesson to Daniel. "Did you see his face? Trying to school me on structural engineering? A construction worker." Henry laughed, and his assistant Ethan Gray forced a chuckle, though his eyes darted nervously to the window. "Sir," Ethan ventured cautiously, "are you sure it's wise to mock the workers like that?" "Some of them seem quite knowledgeable." Henry waved his hand dismissively. "Knowledgeable? Please." "They wouldn't be here if they had real talent. This is a business, Ethan. The higher you stand, the less you need to listen." Ethan's smile faded slightly, but he nodded. The assistant had dreams of climbing the corporate ladder, but today something gnawed at him, a growing sense of unease he couldn't shake. Then it happened. The distant rumble of an approaching engine grew louder, and the dust kicked up on the road as a sleek black Mercedes-Benz rolled onto the site. Workers stopped in their tracks, turning to watch. The car's polished body seemed out of place against the rough, chaotic landscape of the construction site. Its tinted windows reflected the towering cranes and skeletal beams, a strange symbol of authority arriving in their midst. Henry straightened, his smirk fading slightly. "Who the hell is that?" he muttered, lowering his feet to the floor. He adjusted his tie, his confidence flickering just a bit. The car pulled to a stop, and for a moment, nothing happened. Workers exchanged curious glances. Even Samuel Rogers, the veteran site supervisor, emerged from the warehouse, wiping his hands on his dusty overalls. His sharp eyes narrowed as he studied the car. The driver's door opened first. A tall, serious-looking man in a dark suit stepped out, clearly a security guard. He moved swiftly to the back door, opened it, and stepped aside. A second figure emerged, and a hush fell over the sight. It was an older man, sharp-eyed with silver hair, dressed in a dark grey suit that seemed to absorb the sunlight. His posture was erect, his gaze cold and calculating as he surveyed the sight with the calm authority of someone who didn't need to shout to be heard. The workers murmured. "Who is that?" one whispered. "A new investor?" Another speculated, but Daniel Harris knew. His calm expression remained unchanged, but his hand instinctively brushed his pocket, where his old Nokia phone rested. He hadn't looked away from the arriving car, and now he took a slow, deep breath. Inside the office, Henry's face paled slightly. He stood straightening his tie and adjusting his collar. "Ethan, go find out who that is," he snapped, his voice losing some of its bravado. But before Ethan could step outside, the door swung open. The tall security guard's imposing frame filled the doorway for a moment before stepping aside to reveal the silver-haired man. "Mr. Morgan!" Henry's voice was a mix of shock and forced enthusiasm.
"What an unexpected surprise, sir. We weren't expecting a site visit." Thomas C. Morgan, the company chairman, stepped inside without a smile.
His gaze swept the room, lingering for a moment on the disheveled blueprints scattered across the table, then shifted to Henry. "Unexpected, yes. That's the point of an inspection, isn't it?" Morgan's voice was calm, almost gentle, but there was an edge beneath the politeness, a quiet, dangerous edge. Henry's smile faltered. "Of course, sir." "We maintain high standards here, as always. I was just reviewing the project status." Morgan's sharp eyes shifted to Ethan, who seemed to shrink under his gaze. Then, as if dismissing both of them, Morgan turned and looked out the window. From there, he could see the workers, all trying to appear busy while stealing glances at the sleek car and the figure now standing inside the office. "Tell me, Mr. Mitchell," Morgan began, "how are the workers here treated? Do they feel valued? Do they have a voice?" Henry laughed nervously. "Of course, sir. We maintain a very open and respectful environment." "Our team is like a family." Morgan's gaze didn't waver. "A family? Interesting." He looked at Ethan. "And you agree, Mr. Gray?" Ethan hesitated, his eyes darting between his boss and the chairman. "Yes, sir. We try our best to maintain a professional and respectful environment." Outside, Daniel stood near the machinery, his eyes fixed on the office. He saw Samuel Rogers approach him, leaning in close. "That's the chairman, isn't it?" "What's he doing here?" "Observing," Daniel replied, his voice quiet. "Observing what?" Daniel's calm gaze didn't shift. "The truth." Inside, Morgan turned back to Henry, his voice gaining a slight edge. "And would you say you listen to your workers, Mr. Mitchell? Value their input?" "Of course, sir. I always make sure their concerns are heard," Henry lied, the sweat beginning to bead on his forehead. Morgan's cold smile appeared. "I see. Well, I'm here to listen too. Gather your team." "I want to speak to everyone, right here, right now." Henry's eyes widened. "Sir, there's no need for—" "I insist," Morgan interrupted, his tone allowing no argument. "And make sure Mr. Daniel Harris is there." The name landed like a hammer, and Henry's face went pale. Ethan's eyes widened, his gaze instinctively shifting toward the window, where Daniel stood calmly, watching. "Of course, sir. Right away," Henry stammered. As the message spread, workers began to gather near the site office, their curious whispers filling the air. Daniel remained by the edge of the group, his face calm, but his eyes steady and watchful. In the office, Henry's hands trembled as he picked up the intercom. "All staff to the site office, now!" The quiet murmurs grew louder as workers exchanged puzzled glances. But in that crowd, Daniel stood like a quiet mountain solid, unmoving, prepared. Thomas Morgan stood by the window, his cold eyes watching the workers assemble, but his focus remained on one figure, Daniel Harris, the man who had sent the signal, the man who was no ordinary worker, and Henry Mitchell, standing beside his boss, felt the ground beneath him begin to crack. The sun cast a warm, fading glow over the construction site as workers assembled in front of the site office. Their faces ranged from curiosity to concern, murmurs filling the air. Daniel Harris stood at the edge of the crowd, his expression calm and unreadable. He had expected this moment, but even he hadn't predicted how quickly it would unfold. Inside the site office, Henry Mitchell stood behind the glass window, his face pale, his fingers nervously tapping against his thigh. Next to him, Ethan Gray shifted uncomfortably, trying to avoid the gaze of Thomas C. Morgan, the chairman, whose steely eyes never left the gathering workers. There was an air of quiet tension, a sense that something monumental was about to happen. Thomas Morgan stepped forward, opened the door, and walked outside with a calm, deliberate stride. Behind him, Henry and Ethan followed, though the sweat on Henry's brow betrayed his anxiety. The workers parted slightly, creating a clear space in front of the office. Morgan's gaze swept across them, but his attention settled on Daniel, who stood calm and unflinching. "Ladies and gentlemen," Morgan began, his voice strong and steady, "I am Thomas C. Morgan, chairman of this company. I am here today because I believe that every voice deserves to be heard, especially the voices of those who do the real work, the ones who make this company strong." A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some exchanged uncertain glances. Others leaned in closer, sensing the weight of the moment. "But I am also here because I have reason to believe that some voices have been silenced, that some concerns have been ignored." Morgan's eyes shifted briefly to Henry, who tried to maintain a confident smile but failed miserably. "Mr. Mitchell," Morgan continued, turning to Henry, "please explain to your team how you handle their concerns. Specifically, how you respond when they question safety, procedures, or designs." Henry cleared his throat, forcing a smile. "Well, sir, as I mentioned, we maintain an open-door policy. Our workers are always welcome to bring up their concerns. I value their input." Morgan's gaze remained cold. "I see. And do you remember a conversation you had this morning, right here on this site? A conversation where someone tried to warn you about a design flaw?" Henry's forced smile faltered. I don't recall." "Don't you?" Morgan's voice sharpened. "Perhaps Mr. Daniel Harris can refresh your memory." All eyes turned to Daniel, who remained still. His gaze met Morgan's, and there was a brief, silent understanding between them. Then, with a calm, clear voice, Daniel stepped forward. "I did raise a concern, sir, about the Northeast Foundation. I pointed out that the slope of the ground would cause stress and potential misalignment." "And how did Mr. Mitchell respond?" Morgan pressed. Daniel's calm never wavered. "He mocked me, said I was just a worker who didn't understand engineering, that they don't pay construction workers to think." A hush fell over the crowd. Some workers exchanged knowing glances. A few nodded subtly. They had all heard similar words before that stung, that reminded them of their place in the hierarchy. Morgan's eyes narrowed at Henry. "Is that true, Mr. Mitchell?" Henry stammered, his hands twisting nervously. It was a misunderstanding, just a bit of tough management, a way to maintain discipline." "Discipline." Morgan's voice was a cold blade. "Or arrogance?" Henry's face turned red, but he couldn't find a response. Morgan turned back to the workers. "Has anyone else experienced this? Has anyone else tried to speak up and been dismissed, ignored, or ridiculed?" At first, there was only silence. But then Samuel Rogers, the veteran site supervisor, stepped forward. "Yes, sir. I tried to warn Mr. Mitchell about the rebar shipment last month. The steel didn't meet the specifications. He told me to mind my own job." "Me too," called out Rosa, a petite woman who managed inventory. "I reported missing safety equipment. He said I was wasting his time." A young engineer named Tyler spoke next. I tried to adjust the ground survey because of erosion, but Mr. Mitchell overruled it. Said we didn't have time for unnecessary corrections. One by one, the voices grew. Workers and even a few junior engineers spoke up. Complaints, warnings, ignored suggestions, all silenced by a system that favored authority over wisdom. Henry's face had gone from red to pale. He stepped back, his eyes darting, desperate for an escape. "This is a setup," he shouted, trying to regain control. "You can't take the word of a few disgruntled workers." Morgan's voice cut through the air like a razor. "Disgruntled or silenced? Let's find out." He pulled out a sleek tablet and, with a few taps, projected an audio recording onto a nearby digital display set up for site presentations. The voice was unmistakable. Henry's voice, sharp and mocking. "Can you be quiet and let the professionals speak? We don't pay construction workers to think. Just to follow orders." A gasp swept through the crowd. Henry's mouth hung open, his face frozen in shock. Ethan's eyes widened, realizing the full weight of what was happening. "Every company is built on the hard work of many," Morgan said, his voice strong and unwavering. "But a company can only stand tall if it respects the wisdom of those who build it. When arrogance replaces humility, when silence is forced on those who see the truth, the entire foundation begins to crack." He turned to Henry. "Mr. Mitchell, you are relieved of your duties, effective immediately. Pack your belongings. Security will escort you off the site." Henry's knees seemed to buckle, but his pride kept him standing. He opened his mouth to protest, but the look in Morgan's eyes silenced him. The security guard who had accompanied Morgan stepped forward, and Henry stumbled back, his gaze darting wildly before he turned and hurried toward the office. Silence lingered over the workers, a stunned stillness that felt like the calm after a storm. Then Morgan's voice rose again, this time gentler. "I want each of you to know that your voices matter. If you see something wrong, speak up. This site will be better for it, and so will our company." A ripple of quiet applause began, growing louder with each passing second. Daniel stood at the edge, still calm, but there was a faint smile at the corner of his lips. Morgan stepped forward and approached Daniel directly. "Thank you, Mr. Harris. You did what a true leader does. You spoke up when it mattered." "I just did what was right," Daniel replied simply. "That is what makes you exceptional," Morgan said, shaking his hand firmly. As the workers slowly dispersed, some still in shock, others whispering excitedly, Daniel felt a hand on his shoulder. He turned to see Samuel Rogers, the veteran supervisor, smiling proudly. "You knew, didn't you?" Samuel asked. Daniel nodded. "Not everything. Just enough to know the truth always finds a way out." And as the sun finally dipped below the horizon, leaving a warm orange glow in the sky, Daniel walked away from the crowd, his calm demeanor unchanged, but his quiet strength felt more visible than ever. He had spoken up. He had been heard, and for the first time in a long while, the site felt like a place where truth could breathe. As the sun slipped below the horizon, painting the construction site in a warm amber glow, Daniel Harris walked quietly among the workers, feeling a sense of calm he hadn't felt in years. But that calm was short-lived. Just as he was heading to the parking lot, his old flip phone vibrated in his pocket. He answered without hesitation. "Mr. Harris," came the familiar voice of Thomas C. Morgan, steady but tense. "I need you back at the main office, now." Daniel didn't ask questions. He turned and walked briskly back, feeling the weight of something significant looming. When he entered the office, the room was tense. Thomas Morgan stood by the window, his face etched with a mix of anger and disappointment. Across the table stood Ethan Gray, pale and visibly shaken, and next to him was Henry Mitchell, clutching a document with trembling hands. Daniel, Thomas began, his voice measured but firm, would you please take a look at this and tell me what you think? Daniel stepped forward and took the document. It was a financial reporter's series of expense records and purchase orders for construction materials. But something was wrong. The quantities listed didn't match the supplies he had seen on site. Steel beams, concrete mix, and safety equipment were all accounted for in inflated numbers, yet he knew they had been in short supply on the ground. This is wrong, Daniel stated, his voice calm but clear. These materials never arrived on site. We've been short for weeks. Exactly, Thomas said, his gaze now fixed on Henry. Mr. Mitchell, can you explain why the company has been billed for materials that were never delivered? Henry's eyes darted nervously, beads of sweat forming on his forehead. It's a mistake, a clerical error. I was going to address it. A clerical error? Thomas's voice was laced with ice. For over $200,000 in supplies that never existed? I think not. Ethan Gray, who had remained silent until now, finally spoke. Sir, I didn't know. I trusted Henry to handle the procurement. He assured me everything was in order. You didn't know? Thomas turned to Ethan, his gaze piercing. Or you didn't want to know? Because as long as the reports showed progress and you hit your targets, you were happy to ignore the details. I trusted him, Ethan snapped, his voice defensive. Henry has been with us for years. He knows the process. But do you know the process? Thomas pressed. Or are you just riding on titles and signatures without ever checking the reality on the ground? Ethan fell silent, his face flushing with shame. Daniel stepped forward. Sir, may I ask a question? Go ahead, Thomas nodded. Mr. Mitchell, Daniel began, his voice steady. Did you or anyone else receive kickbacks from these false orders? Did any of this money end up in your pocket? Henry's face went white. What? No? I would never. Then why is your signature on every single one of these purchase orders? Thomas interjected, his voice sharp. And why do we have digital records of private messages between you and the supplier discussing a special arrangement? Silence crushed the room like a suffocating fog. Henry's lips trembled, and his legs seemed to lose their strength. He sank into the nearest chair, covering his face with his hands. It wasn't supposed to go this far, he whispered. It was just supposed to be a little extra, just a little bit on the side. Thomas's expression didn't change. A little bit? You jeopardized the safety of this entire site, put your team's lives at risk, and stole from the company. All for a little bit? Ethan staggered back, his face pale. Henry, how could you? I needed the money. Henry's voice broke, his hands shaking. My wife's medical bills, the mortgage. I just needed a little extra, and the supplier offered me a cut for adjusting the orders. I didn't think anyone would notice. Thomas sighed, a deep, weary sound. Mr. Mitchell, you didn't just betray this company. You betrayed every single worker who trusted you, who depended on you to ensure their safety. I'm sorry, Henry whispered, tears filling his eyes. I'm so sorry. Sorry won't rebuild a collapsed building, Thomas said coldly, and it won't bring back lives lost because of faulty materials. Ethan tried to speak, but Thomas silenced him with a gesture. And you, Mr. Gray, will be placed under immediate review. You had a responsibility to oversee these transactions, to ensure transparency. Your negligence is just as dangerous as Mr. Mitchell's greed. Ethan's shoulders slumped, his head bowed. Thomas turned to Daniel. Mr. Harris, I owe you an apology. You were right about the foundation, about the missing materials, and because you had the courage to speak up, we are catching this before it becomes a tragedy. Daniel simply nodded. I just did what was right, sir. No, Thomas corrected. You did more. You spoke up when others were silent. And that takes real courage. He turned back to Henry and Ethan. Mr. Mitchell,
You are terminated effective immediately.
Security will escort you off the premises. You will return any company property, and you will receive a formal notice regarding the charges that will be filed against you. Henry seemed to shrink in his chair, his face wet with tears. Security guards entered and took him by the arms, gently but firmly, leading him away. As for you, Mr.
Gray, Thomas continued, you are suspended without pay pending a full investigation. If you are found complicit, you will face the same consequences. Ethan said nothing. He simply turned and walked out, his footsteps heavy with the weight of his shattered career. Once the room was empty, Thomas stepped forward and shook Daniel's hand firmly. Mr. Harris, from this moment forward, you are promoted to site supervisor. Your job is not just to oversee the work, but to ensure that the voices of every worker are heard. Can you do that? I won't let you down, sir, Daniel replied, his voice steady. I know you won't, Thomas said with a rare, genuine smile. Because you understand what many forget true leadership is about listening. It's about knowing that wisdom can come from anyone, no matter their title. As Daniel stepped out of the office, the air felt different, clearer. The workers were gathered, watching with quiet curiosity. When they saw Daniel emerge, some began to smile. Others gave him subtle nods of respect, and as he walked through the site, feeling their quiet admiration, Daniel knew that he had earned something far greater than a new title. He had earned their trust, and that was worth more than any position or paycheck. Daniel Harris stood by the reinforced steel beams of the construction site, feeling the weight of his new position as site supervisor. But this wasn't just a promotion, it was a responsibility, a chance to prove that honesty and integrity mattered more than titles or connections. Yet even as the sun cast long shadows over the site, a quiet tension lingered in the air. Just as Daniel was inspecting the foundation work, his phone buzzed in his pocket. A message from Thomas C. Morgan, the company's chairman. Meet me in the conference room in 10 minutes. Bring the latest foundation reports. Daniel's heart raced. He grabbed the reports, neatly folded in a worn leather binder, and walked toward the main office. As he stepped inside, the cold air of the air-conditioned room hit him, but the real chill came from the expressions of the men gathered around the conference table. Seated with stern faces were Thomas C. Morgan, the chairman, and Gregory Mitchell, the senior engineer who had been part of the company since its earliest days. On the far side of the table stood Ethan Gray, the former project manager, his face pale and his eyes averted. A seat at the head of the table was empty, clearly meant for Daniel. Take a seat, Mr. Harris. Thomas's voice was steady, but it carried a weight that silenced the room. Daniel sat, placing the binder on the table in front of him. Thomas leaned forward, his hands clasped. Mr. Harris, Thomas began, the more we dig into the site's records, the more troubling issues we find. It's clear that the problems run deeper than just Henry Mitchell's false reports, and I need to know, are you willing to help me uncover the truth? Daniel didn't hesitate. Yes, sir, I won't hide anything. Thomas nodded, a flicker of respect in his gaze. Good. Because today, we're going to review every record, every report, and we're going to see just how far this rot goes. Gregory slid a thick folder across the table. These are the maintenance logs and inspection reports for the foundation, but as you can see, some of them have been altered. Signatures were forged and dates were changed. Daniel opened the folder and immediately recognized the problem. Reports that he had personally signed were missing, replaced by documents with his name scribbled in a style that didn't match his own handwriting. These aren't my signatures, Daniel whispered, anger simmering beneath his calm demeanor. Exactly, Gregory replied. It seems someone wanted to make it look like you were involved in the cover-up. Daniel's fists clenched, but he maintained his composure. Who had access to these records? Thomas's gaze darkened. Ethan Gray did. As project manager, he had oversight of all documents. Ethan's head snapped up, his face pale,
No, sir, I didn't forge anything. I trusted Henry. I thought everything was in order. You thought? Thomas's voice was sharp. Or you just didn't care to check because it was easier to ignore? Ethan's lips trembled. I didn't want to cause trouble. I thought as long as the numbers looked good, everything was fine. That's the problem with complacency, Thomas said coldly. It blinds you, and it costs others their safety. Daniel spoke up, his voice clear. Mr. Morgan, I can tell you this. I never altered any documents. My reports were always clear. I warned about the foundation, about the missing materials. But I was ignored, Thomas nodded. I know, Daniel. That's why I asked you here. Because today, you're going to help me clear this mess. The meeting stretched on as they reviewed report after report, each one revealing more signs of manipulation. Some documents were stamped with approval dates that didn't match the actual inspection dates. Others had been backdated to create a false timeline of safety compliance. As they worked, Gregory explained the true danger. The Northeast Foundation has already shown signs of cracking. If it's not properly reinforced, we're looking at a potential structural failure within months. Thomas's jaw tightened, and all because someone wanted to save a few $1,000s. Ethan's head hung low, shame evident in his expression. I never thought it would come to this. That's because you never thought at all, Thomas snapped. You just signed off and hoped the problems would go away. Silence fell over the room until Daniel spoke. Sir, we need to do more than just uncover the truth. We need to fix this. We need to make sure this never happens again. That's exactly what I intend to do, Thomas replied. But first, I need to make an example of those responsible. Just then the door opened and a security officer entered. He handed Thomas a sealed envelope. Thomas opened it, his eyes scanning the contents. His face darkened. It's worse than we thought, he said, his voice low. We have evidence that Henry Mitchell received direct payments from the supplier in exchange for falsifying the purchase orders, and those payments were funneled through a shell company. Ethan's head snapped up. What? No, I had no idea. Thomas looked directly at him. Ignorance is not an excuse. You were responsible for overseeing this project. You failed. Ethan's shoulders slumped. Please give me another chance. I'll make it right. Make it right. Thomas's voice was a cold knife. You had your chance to make it right. You could have listened to Daniel when he warned you, but instead, you buried your head in the sand. Ethan's voice cracked. Please. But Thomas shook his head. You're suspended without pay, pending a full investigation. If you're found complicit, you will face legal consequences. Ethan stood slowly, his legs shaky. He glanced at Daniel, his eyes pleading, but Daniel's gaze was steady, resolute. This was not about revenge, it was about justice. Once Ethan left, Thomas turned to Daniel. Mr. Harris, I want you to conduct a full site inspection. Take Gregory with you. I want every beam, every slab, every support checked. And I want you to interview every worker, every engineer who may have seen something suspicious. I'll do it, sir, Daniel replied, his voice firm. And Daniel, Thomas added, if you find anyone else involved, you bring them straight to me. No exceptions. Yes, sir. As Daniel walked out of the conference room with Gregory, he felt a mix of determination and responsibility. This wasn't just about saving a project. This was about restoring integrity to a company built on trust. The sun was setting, casting long shadows over the construction site. But as Daniel looked at the towering steel frame of the building, he knew one thing for sure. This foundation would stand strong, not because of the concrete or the steel, but because the truth had finally come to light. And no one, not a corrupt manager, not a negligent supervisor, would ever bury it again. Daniel Harris walked alongside Gregory Mitchell, the seasoned senior engineer, as they moved through the vast, sun-drenched construction site. The afternoon wind stirred clouds of dust,
But beneath the bright sky, a storm was brewing. Workers glanced up from their tasks, their expressions a mix of curiosity and unease. Word had spread, something was wrong with the project's foundation, and the site was under intense scrutiny. "Where should we start?" Gregory asked, his voice steady, but his eyes sharp. Daniel didn't hesitate. "We start with the Northeast Foundation. That's where the first cracks were reported. If there's a problem, it will show there." As they approached the section in question, Daniel noticed the subtle signs that others might have missed, hairline fractures spreading along the edges of the concrete, small but unmistakable. He pulled out his tablet and began taking notes, his fingers moving quickly over the screen. "Gregory, take a look at this," Daniel called out, kneeling to trace the cracks with his fingertips. "These aren't just surface cracks, they're stress fractures." Gregory leaned in, his experienced eyes following the lines. "You're right. And look at this water pooling near the base. The ground isn't stable." They moved methodically, measuring the cracks, photographing the damage, and recording their observations. But it wasn't just the physical damage that concerned Daniel, it was the silence of the workers. As he and Gregory moved from section to section, they passed groups of laborers who glanced at them but quickly looked away, their faces tense. "Do you see that?" Daniel whispered to Gregory. "They know something, but they're too afraid to speak." Gregory sighed. Can you blame them? When you have people like Henry Mitchell and Ethan Gray running things, workers learn to keep their mouths shut. It's survival. Daniel's jaw tightened. "Not anymore. Not if I can help it." They approached a group of workers gathered around a large cement mixer, their faces a mix of caution and suspicion. Daniel recognized one of them, Luis, a young mason who had been with the company for 3 years. "Luis," Daniel called out, waving him over. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Luis hesitated, glancing nervously at his colleagues before stepping forward. "Yes, Mr. Harris?" "I need you to be honest with me," Daniel began, his voice calm but firm. "Have you noticed any issues with the foundation? Any problems with the materials?" Luis's eyes darted left and right, his voice dropping to a whisper. "I don't want to get in trouble." "You won't. I promise. But if there's a problem and we don't fix it, everyone is at risk." Luis swallowed hard, his hands twisting nervously. I saw them pouring concrete without the proper mix. It was too watery, and the steel beams, they weren't the right grade. But when I tried to tell Mr. Mitchell, he told me to mind my own business. Gregory's expression darkened, just as we suspected. Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Luis's shoulder. "Thank you, Luis. You did the right thing by telling us." "Will I get fired for this?" Luis asked, his voice trembling. "Not on my watch," Daniel promised. "But you need to be ready to tell the truth if anyone asks." They continued their inspection, moving from section to section. Each area seemed to tell the same story: corners cut, materials substituted, safety measures ignored. And with each discovery, Daniel's anger grew. "How many more people have seen this and stayed silent?" he muttered, frustration in his voice. "Probably a lot," Gregory replied. "But fear is a powerful thing, Daniel. When you see people punished for speaking up, you learn to stay quiet." "Not anymore," Daniel declared, his voice firm. "That ends today." They returned to the main office trailer, where Thomas Morgan was waiting. His expression was unreadable, but the tension in his shoulders spoke volumes. "What did you find?" Thomas asked, his gaze shifting between Daniel and Gregory. Daniel placed the tablet on the table, the screen displaying the photographs and notes they had taken. "It's worse than we thought. The foundation is compromised in multiple areas: incorrect materials, poor mix ratios, stress fractures, all covered up." Thomas's jaw tightened. "And the workers?" "Do they know?" "They know, but they're afraid to say anything," Daniel explained. "They've been silenced by people like Henry Mitchell." "Well, they won't be silenced anymore," Thomas declared, This company was built on integrity, on listening to the people who do the real work.
That's going to change. Gregory stepped forward. Thomas, we need to issue a site-wide review, not just the foundation, but all the critical structural elements. If this is what's beneath the surface, who knows what else has been compromised? Thomas nodded. Agreed. But first, we need to address the culture of fear. I want a meeting with all site supervisors and workers. No managers, just the people who do the real work. Daniel's eyes widened. You want them to speak freely? In front of each other? I want them to know they can speak without fear, Thomas replied, and I want them to understand that the company stands with them, not against them. The announcement was made within the hour. Workers were gathered in the large open area near the equipment storage. Thomas stood on a makeshift platform, flanked by Daniel and Gregory. The workers murmured among themselves, curious but wary. Ladies and gentlemen, Thomas began, his voice clear and strong. I am Thomas C. Morgan, and I built this company from the ground up with one simple principle, honesty. But somewhere along the way, we lost that. People stopped listening to you. Worse, some of you were punished for speaking up. A murmur of agreement swept through the crowd. Thomas continued, that ends today. Starting now, anyone who sees a problem has the right to report it directly to me or Mr. Harris here. No fear of retaliation, no more being ignored. If you know something, say something. A hand shot up from the crowd. It was Rosa, one of the site supervisors. Mr. Morgan, I've reported faulty materials twice, but my reports were ignored. Not anymore, Thomas promised. From now on, your voice matters. Another worker stepped forward. The beams in Section B, they don't meet the specs we were given. And the rebar in Section C, another added. It's too thin. I saw the boxes. They were mismarked. Thomas turned to Daniel. Make a list of every issue they bring up. We will investigate every one of them. For the first time, the workers' faces showed hope, a spark of courage they hadn't felt before. And as Thomas spoke, their fear began to fade. From this day forward, no one at Eaglestone Constructions will ever be punished for speaking the truth, Thomas declared. Because the strength of a building comes from its foundation, and the strength of this company comes from you. As the crowd began to disperse, Daniel turned to Gregory, a sense of pride swelling in his chest. We did it, he whispered. We gave them back their voices. Gregory smiled, clapping him on the shoulder. No, Daniel, you did it, and you just might have saved this company. The morning sun bathed the Eaglestone construction site in a warm, golden light, but the atmosphere was far from tranquil. Workers moved about with cautious glances, whispers trailing behind them like shadows. The news had spread. Thomas Morgan had called for a full review of the project, and the workers were no longer bound by fear. Today, they could finally speak. Daniel Harris stood by the makeshift platform, watching as workers gathered in the open space. Their faces bore a mix of hesitation and hope. Some leaned against equipment, arms crossed protectively, while others stood in small groups, murmuring among themselves. Many had never been asked for their opinions before, and even now their trust was fragile. Are you sure this is a good idea? Gregory Mitchell asked quietly, standing beside Daniel. Some of them are still scared. Years of silence don't disappear overnight. They don't, Daniel agreed. But if even one person speaks, it will open the door for others. On the platform, Thomas Morgan raised his hand, and the scattered murmurs died down. His voice was steady but filled with conviction. Good morning, everyone. I'm here because I need your help. This project has faced serious issues that could have been prevented if your voices had been heard. A few workers shifted uncomfortably, avoiding his gaze. For too long, some of you have been silenced, dismissed, ignored, even threatened. That ends now. I want to hear from you without fear, without punishment. If you've seen something wrong, now is the time to say it. Silence hung heavy in the air. Workers exchanged nervous glances, and for a moment it seemed no one would speak. Then a voice broke the stillness. I saw it. Rosa, the supply supervisor, stepped forward. Her voice was strong, but her hands trembled slightly. I saw the rebar shipments. The boxes were labeled high-grade steel, but the weight was off. When I questioned it, they told me it was a new lightweight alloy, but I knew it wasn't right. Thomas nodded. Thank you, Rosa. What happened when you reported it? I was told to mind my own business, she replied, her voice tightening. That I wasn't an engineer, so I didn't understand. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Other workers nodded, their confidence growing. That's not all, Louise, the young mason, spoke next. The concrete mix, it was too watery. I told my supervisor, but he just shrugged, said it would dry faster and we could move ahead of schedule. Another voice joined in. The beams in Section B, they weren't the right grade. I saw the delivery tags, they were switched after they arrived. Daniel's heart pounded in his chest. This was it. The silence was breaking. A young woman in a hard hat, her name tag reading Maria, stepped forward. I've seen reports get changed. Inspection records marked as passed when we all knew they hadn't been checked properly. I tried to tell my supervisor, but he just laughed. One by one, the workers stepped forward, their stories spilling out like water breaking through a dam. Defective materials, ignored warnings, falsified reports, all buried under the weight of arrogance and fear. Some spoke with anger, others with sadness, and a few with quiet shame for having stayed silent. But as they spoke, a transformation began to take place. Those who had started with trembling voices found them growing stronger. Those who had avoided eye contact now stood taller, their gazes meeting Thomas's, Daniel's, and even each other's. I thought I was alone, Rosa whispered, wiping a tear from her cheek. I thought no one would believe me. You're not alone, Thomas replied, stepping down from the platform to stand among them. None of you are, and from this day forward, you never will be. Daniel stepped forward. We're going to fix this. But we need you, your knowledge, your experience, and your courage, because a company is only as strong as the people who build it. A sense of unity began to spread through the crowd. Workers who had once kept their heads down now exchanged determined nods. Engineers who had been silent in the face of arrogance now listened intently, their pride giving way to humility. Gregory leaned toward Daniel. You were right. Once one person spoke, the rest followed. That's because the truth is like a flame, Daniel replied. It only takes one spark to set it ablaze. Thomas returned to the platform, his voice rising with newfound strength. I promise you this, no one who speaks the truth will be punished. Not now, not ever, not... And those who have silenced you, they will answer for it. A cheer erupted, not a loud roar, but a steady, determined call of support. The workers weren't just watching anymore. They were part of something that felt like justice. Suddenly, the doors to the main office trailer swung open, and Henry Mitchell stepped out, his face a mask of frustration. Behind him was Ethan Gray, the site manager, his expression unreadable. What is the meaning of this? Henry demanded, his voice sharp. We have work to do. This is a construction site, not a therapy session. The crowd's cheers fell silent, and a tension settled over the gathering. But this time the workers didn't scatter. They didn't look away. They stood firm, their eyes fixed on Henry. This is a truth session, Thomas corrected, his voice calm but unyielding. These workers are speaking up because they care about the integrity of this project, something you seem to have forgotten. Henry's face flushed with anger. This is a waste of time. We're losing money every minute they stand here. Are we? Daniel challenged, stepping forward. Or have we already lost more than we can count because of lies and shortcuts? Ethan Gray moved to Henry's side, his voice low. Henry, maybe we should listen.
Listen to what? To a bunch of laborers pretending to be engineers? Henry snapped, his arrogance on full display. This is my project and I make the decisions here. No, Henry, Thomas said, his voice ringing out clearly. This is my company, and you are done here. Gasps echoed through the crowd. Henry's face went pale, his bravado crumbling. You can't do this. I just did, Thomas replied. You ignored warnings, falsified reports, and silenced the people who keep this project standing. Your actions have put lives at risk. You're fired. Security guards appeared at the edge of the crowd, moving toward Henry, who stepped back, his face twisting in desperation. This isn't over, he shouted. You think you can run this place without me? These workers don't know anything. They know more than you think, Thomas replied. And they have something you lost a long time ago, honesty. The guards led Henry away, his protests fading into the distance. But the workers didn't cheer. They stood in respectful silence, knowing that while justice had been served, it came with a heavy price. Thomas turned back to the crowd. Today is the beginning of something new. A place where everyone has a voice and no one is ignored. Where the foundation isn't just concrete and steel, but respect and integrity. Daniel stepped forward once more. If you see something, say something, because a building is only as strong as the people who build it. The workers erupted in applause, their voices joining together in a chorus of hope. No longer just silent witnesses, they were the builders of something greater. The evening sun cast long shadows over the Eaglestone construction site, but the air was filled with a sense of anticipation. Workers gathered in small groups, whispering among themselves, their faces a mixture of relief and uncertainty. Some still wore their dusty work jackets, while others had removed their helmets, wiping the sweat from their brows. The events of the day had shaken the site, truths revealed, authority challenged, and a reckoning that no one could have predicted. At the center of it all stood Thomas Morgan, calm yet resolute, his gaze steady as he addressed the workers who had once called him Jamal without realizing who he truly was. Now, there was no need for pretense. He was Thomas, the founder and chairman of Eaglestone Constructions, a leader who had chosen to stand with the workers rather than above them. Listen carefully, Thomas began, his voice carrying over the hushed crowd. What happened here today is not just about one man's arrogance or one project's flaws. It's about something much bigger. It's about how we choose to build not just buildings, but a company, a community, and a culture. Beside him stood Daniel Harris, his trusted advisor, who had been with him through every phase of Eaglestone's rise. Daniel's eyes scanned the crowd, seeing the mix of expression, hope, doubt, and quiet determination. These were people who had worked in silence for too long, their knowledge ignored, their warnings dismissed. But today, that silence had been broken. We build with concrete and steel, yes, Thomas continued, but more importantly, we build with trust, with respect, and with integrity. Without those, even the strongest structures will crumble. A murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Some workers nodded, while others exchanged knowing glances. They had seen firsthand how a foundation can fail when corners are cut and voices are silenced. To those who spoke up today, Rosa, Luis, Maria, and everyone else, I want to thank you, Thomas said, his gaze settling on the faces of those who had dared to tell the truth. Your courage has saved this project, and more importantly, it has saved lives. Because a building with a flawed foundation is a disaster waiting to happen. Rosa stepped forward, hesitant at first, but encouraged by the warmth in Thomas's voice. We were scared, she admitted, her voice trembling slightly. We thought if we spoke up, we'd lose our jobs. And that is the real problem, Thomas said, his voice firm. No one should ever fear for their job because they told the truth. That ends today. Beside him, Daniel raised his voice. From this day forward, Eaglestone will have a new policy, the voice of safety. Every worker, regardless of their position, will have the right to report any safety concern or ethical issue directly to the executive team.
No supervisor can silence you. No manager can ignore you. A wave of astonishment swept through the crowd. A young worker named Luis raised his hand. But what if they punish us for speaking up? They won't, Thomas assured him. And if anyone tries, they will answer directly to me. Another worker, Maria, stepped forward. And those who falsified reports, the ones who ignored us, will they just get away with it? Thomas's gaze hardened. No. Marcus Ellison has been held accountable for his actions, and anyone else who participated in silencing you or endangering this project will be reviewed. This is not just about one man, it is about changing an entire culture. A soft murmur of agreement spread through the workers. They could feel it. This wasn't just another speech. It was a promise. But it doesn't end here, Thomas continued. We must rebuild not just the foundations of this project, but the foundations of trust between all of us. That's why, starting next week, we are launching the Workers' Council. The crowd leaned in, curious. This council will be made up of representatives from every level: engineers, supervisors, and yes, you the workers. It will meet regularly to discuss safety, ethics, and any concerns you have, and its decisions will be binding. Your voices will not only be heard, they will have the power to create change. A cheer erupted, tentative at first, but growing louder with each passing second. For the first time, the workers felt like they were not just laborers. They were part of something larger, something they could help shape. Thomas raised his hand, and the crowd fell silent. And one more thing. To those who think titles and degrees make them better than others, remember this. Knowledge can be learned, but wisdom comes from listening. Respect is not a gift, it is earned. Daniel smiled, feeling a sense of pride swelling in his chest. This was the Thomas he had always believed in, the leader who understood that greatness was not in how high you stood, but in how many you lifted with you. From now on, Thomas declared, any worker who raises a safety concern or suggests an improvement that proves valuable will receive recognition and a reward. We will not just build buildings, we will build a culture of respect, trust, and accountability. Luis couldn't contain his excitement. Does that mean even a worker can help design a project? Yes, Thomas answered without hesitation. If you see something we don't, speak up. If you have an idea to make things better, share it. And if you see something wrong, never be afraid to say so. The cheer that followed was not just louder, it was proud. Workers who had once kept their heads down now stood tall, a sense of dignity replacing the fear that had once bound them. As the crowd began to disperse, Rosa approached Thomas, her eyes filled with gratitude. Thank you, sir. I never thought someone like me could make a difference. You didn't just make a difference, Rosa, Thomas said, his voice warm. You helped save this company from itself. Beside them, Daniel placed a reassuring hand on Rosa's shoulder. And you won't be alone. From now on, we stand together. As the workers returned to their tasks, their steps seemed lighter, their voices louder, and their faces brighter. The construction site, once a place of silent suffering, had become a place of pride. Thomas watched them, a quiet smile on his face. The strongest foundations, he whispered to Daniel, are not built with concrete and steel. They are built with courage, integrity, and the willingness to listen. Daniel nodded. You've given them a voice, Thomas. And they will never forget it. The two men stood side by side, watching as the workers spread out across the site, not just laboring, but building something far greater than walls and beams. They were building a culture of honesty, respect, and accountability, one that would stand long after the concrete had set. And as the sun began to dip below the horizon, casting a warm, golden glow over the site, Thomas felt a sense of peace. Not because he had restored order, but because he had restored something far more valuable: trust. In that moment,
Eaglestone wasn't just a company. It was a community, a family, and it was built on the strongest foundation of all: the courage to speak, the humility to listen, and the integrity to change. In life, a person's true value isn't defined by their title, education, or social status. It is defined by their character, honesty, and willingness to listen. The story of Thomas Jamal Carter is a powerful reminder that humility and respect are the foundation of any lasting success. Sometimes, the most valuable lessons come from those we overlook or underestimate. Marcus Ellison paid a steep price for his arrogance and prejudice, but the story also shows that it is never too late to change. Life is a series of opportunities to learn and correct our mistakes. It doesn't matter where you once stood. What matters is what you learn from your mistakes and how you are willing to grow. For older viewers, this story is a reminder that wisdom doesn't just come with age. It comes from an open heart, a willingness to listen, and a readiness to learn from everyone, regardless of their background. Keep an open mind, appreciate those who speak up for what is right, and always be ready to change when faced with the truth.